one set of 5Gs to welcome another set of 5Gs on the stage who will interrogate the discussion a little bit further, beginning with the Minister of State of Public Investments and Resource Mobilization, Minister Janine Munyeshuli. Sidi Oudta, the President of the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa. Aigboje Aig Imokwere, the Chairman of Access Holdings. Ralph Mupita, MTN Group President and CEO. And last but not least, Mr. Sergio Pimente, the Vice President for Africa at the IFC. Greetings to you all. Minister, we have been crossing paths a lot lately. Yeah, we were together in January at the World Economic Forum. I was with you just the other day at the African Union meetings, I think it is. And so I want to reflect and start this question with you, ma'am, because in my view, 2023 was a relatively significant year for the African story and the discourse and where we do sit in the global standing. You'll remember that in 2023, in August, South Africa hosted the BRICS conference. An announcement was made of expansion in which I believe the grouping invited 5 other countries, 6 initially, 5 accepted, and we have gained more neighbors from the African continent in the BRICS. We also recently, in November, I believe, had the African Union finally gain its place as the 21st member amongst the other big Gs. Notwithstanding the louder voice that a lot of African policymakers and business grew when it did come to matters of geopolitical standing, a divergent voice in certain matters of war from the global north, notwithstanding some of the risks to economies and maybe political relations. Significant events, in my view, ma'am. In your view, though, has anything changed in terms of Africa's standing at the table, or are we on the menu?
Thank you, Fifi. And welcome to Kigali. I heard it's your first time, and not the last, I hope.
Thank you.
So before we discuss even if it's a good news or bad news, let's just remember that what has been repeatedly said this morning, we are a population of 1.4 billion people. And wasn't it high time we join, or the G20 welcomes us as African Union to the group? But we still are one voice among 20, as we represent 20% of the world population. So just put things into perspective. And what has also been said this morning, and I hope you hear it again and again, so that we ponder upon that fact, we are the fast growing middle class and population in the world. So the potential for growth there is remarkable. I agree with what has been also said. The discourse is changing. And to the fact that you just highlighted, yes, the African Union has joined the G20, so there is a chance that our voice is heard. But maybe I feel it's also high time we reframe some questions. Fine, we are at that table. Is it a point of celebration that finally this year or last year we joined that table? How influential will our voice be if we don't stand together and have one voice? That's for one. And second, as we convene in Kigali, and I would agree with Maktar, 10 years ago I was in Geneva at the Africa CEO Forum. Also good news, we are invited at the table with the powers that be. Isn't that also high time we set our own table and invite our friends and partners to eat?
Okay. Okay.
So it's an invitation for us, yes, celebrate. You are invited at a place where you are one voice against 20 others. However, you represent 20% of the world population. It is good to have a seat, but how influential is your voice if you don't come as one voice And last but not least, look at the convening power of our continent, let alone the convening power of the CEO Forum today. Can't we not host our own events of such a scale? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Tarser, how do you see things?
In fact, when we look back 10 years, some may believe that nothing has changed. But if we travel, as I did extensively in Africa, and meet the captain of industries, the youth, the women working on the ground, we see a tremendous change in Africa. And that creates hope for the future and for the voice of Africa to be heard and for Africa to have the right place on the right table. So let us take 3 examples. The first example is the new generation, the Alpha generation. So if we look at what is going on today in Africa, we realize that the young generation is totally different from all previous generations. And today, as we talk about the global South and global North, we can talk about the global youth. That's a new reality. There is a global youth. Because today, a kid in Kigali is playing with a kid in Kinshasa, a kid in Cairo, or in Cape Town. Today, the youth are tech-savvy, and they are really very innovative. And I was amazed meeting some of the startups, the tech startups in Africa, and seeing how they have been able, during COVID, to develop very innovative solutions, not only for the health sector, but also for trade, making the continental free trade agreement potentially a reality. The second example is about agricultural value chain. And the Excellency the President has made it clear that we need to transform our product on our continent. And today, if we look at the role played by some pioneers, captain of industries, but also some financial institution, African financial institution, we see the development of specialized economic zone, to transform, to process our product in Africa and add value and create jobs for youth. The third area is the women's ability to develop the business, particularly through micro, small, and medium enterprise. And as you know, SMEs represent more than 90% of the economic tissue in Africa. Most of them are out of the formal sector. But today, they are not only targeting their local market, but sometimes even considering an African and a global market. And digital solutions to make microfinance at their disposal are really increasing their power and their capacity to develop their business.
Sure. It's probably an irony that we are having this conversation amongst ourselves at a table. Table of the future, maybe one invented by AI. Nonetheless, we are at the table. And then the same question to you, Mr. Imokwere, then goes. Your take on the change globally, the resetting of all these relationships that we have been reporting as members of the media, those of you who are keen watchers of CNBC Africa, I hope that you are, you would have heard that coverage. Has anything changed in your view in terms of our standing?
I think it's interesting that, this year we celebrate 140 years of the Berlin Conference. That was probably the first table where Africa was thoroughly discussed.
Sure.
Unfortunately, we were at the breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the time. But things have moved significantly. First of all, there's no longer one table, in the sense that if you think finance, you might say the IMF, the World Bank, you think about geopolitics, you think about the UN, G20, you think about health, you talk about the WHO, and we can go on and on. And the fact that today, whether as chefs or as organizers of tables, Africans begin to play a role as CEOs of some of these organizations and so on. Certainly, the argument about whether we have a seat is answered in the affirmative. The question, of course, is that is the seat as high as the seat of others? Are we sitting on seats or are we sitting on stools? And when we come to the table, does the substance of our invitation and the substance of what we bring to the table give us the type of voice that is listened to and carries a lot of weight? I'll just give you a simple example. With climate change and the energy transition and the arguments and issues around the energy transition, Africa had the loudest voice around the issue of just transition. And to be honest, our voices were loud, clear, very articulate, but did not carry much weight. And it's very interesting that, just 3 years ago, when big oil started to pivot and took decisions to slow down the cuts on energy, the world rewarded them with higher prices, share prices, and, of course, as we know, right now, it's no longer that popular to speak about slowing down or it's no longer that unpopular, rather, to speak about slowing down the energy transition process. So my view is that there is still a long way to go, but I like to think about us having our own tables. And I think we should learn from what Asia has done very effectively. And by ensuring that your common markets, that which you have, look at our population, 1.2 billion Africans, look at our youth demographic. If we position these things in our favor, the tables that we command could become very influential. Indeed, actually, as far as I'm concerned, the youth table for the future of the world is Africa's.
Strong point there. Reiterating the point of Mr. Tar there on the global youth phrase that we need to speak more pronouncedly about. Ralph, is it a stool, is it a chair, is it chagalaka, is it yam? How do you see things?
I just wanted to pivot off the point that Ike raised, which I think is a really fundamental point. This whole discourse around the tables, I think it's important that we start thinking about the African table. As we think about those 5 Gs that were shared earlier on, just to touch on 2, maybe 3, I think when you think about the geopolitics and say what is behind what we're seeing the last 1,000 days, it can be one of 2 things. One is just sheer power, demonstrating sheer power, or economic interest. And if you start thinking about the economic interest has to be about the future. And what Makta Diop said really around Gen AI, we on this continent should be really seized with the direction of generative artificial intelligence, the ability for systems, computers, to be able to process new content to drive productivity. And when you think about what's happening there is enormous amount of investment. The languages that are being ingested in those models, very few African languages. So if you think that this is a vehicle for transformation, for a transformation as important as electricity, I think if we don't organize ourselves as Africans very quickly, we could be left behind. We could be left behind because you don't have those productivity tools for the bulk of the people of that continent. And hence coming back to Ike's point, which is, let's start with our own table on the geopolitics side. So if you come to the point around the global debt situation and how it affects us as Africans, the point was also made that the needs for Africa are very capital intensive. And we need, as we sit on our own table, to talk about how are we going to build the necessary infrastructure. Just digital infrastructure requires $100 billion on the African continent to ensure that everybody has access to broadband. We don't have that yet. And that's an agenda which we should have on our African table. And the final one, which is this Gen Alpha point, which is the future. The future of this world in terms of the big consumers, 30, 40, 50 years out, absolutely is Africa. Why do we see US companies, Chinese companies, and the like building subsea cable all around Africa? It's because that's the future, preparing for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So we have to, as we are using this forum and the platform of Africa CEO Forum, to really think about our table, because once we are aligned, once we align around 2063 vision, I think we will be a lot more powerful, more influential around the global dynamics. So the table I really vote for is our own table, where the stools are the same height, you're not sitting on a differentially leveled stool, and we shape the agenda during this great reset that we're all experiencing right now. And that would be my contribution to the question.
Okay, fantastic. So Joe, final thoughts from you just in terms of the opening remarks and the standing, and I think that your perspective will be an interesting one as well, looking at the continent from the outside and notwithstanding the work that the IFC does within Africa. I mean, we have heard about, what change and impact really does one voice or two voices in 20 make. We've heard about the fact that, are we a stool, are we a chair? We've heard about the fact that we shouldn't even be aspiring to go to the existing table. We should create our own. Your thoughts, given everything that has been happening in the recent while on Africa's standing in matters of global discourse?
Thank you very much, Fifi, and it's a great pleasure to be here. I think a lot has been said about this table, and I'm trying to kind of visualize. And I think in a world of technology, we have to think about there's no more one table. There's all kinds of furniture floating around, and I'm sure artificial intelligence will create furniture that we will not even recognize.
Sure.
But what I see in Africa, I really see that Africa is, compared to 10 years ago, compared with the first CEO forum that I went and what I've been doing over these last years, I see that Africa is changing the way it's looking at the issues. And it's looking at solutions in Africa. So it's no more a continent of opportunity, it's a continent of solutions. And I see African companies, I see African leaders really every day looking at how can I contribute to find a solution to the problems that we talked about. Because there's always a debate. I mean, we're talking about tables, before we talked about glasses, half full, half empty, what we put on the table. But there are challenges. Of course there are challenges, we all know them. But the solutions, I think, are bigger than the challenges today. And I see that happening. I see a lot that can the technology bring. I think it was mentioned a number of times this morning. And when I look at technology, I also look at, some of the challenges that Africa had. We talk about informality, we talk about SMEs, how we reach them. With technology, you can bring them in. You can bring them at the table. So I think that's one of the aspects that we can really think about. The other aspect, it was mentioned several times about the youth, in particular women, how you bring them to the economic table. I think all this is working in the right direction. So at the IFC, I mean, what we see, I think that was your question, Fifi, is that we see a very strong evolution of also the type of investments that we are doing and the type of companies that we are helping. Today, the large majority of our clients are African companies that are investing on the continent, in their own country, but also across the continent. And what is interesting is that they're also going outside of their, I would say, comfort zone of the neighboring countries. You see companies from Kenya asking us about, can I invest in Nigeria, can I invest in Cote d'Ivoire, can I invest in different parts of the continent? And we do really see this crisscrossing of investment, not just on trade, I'm talking about investment, that is really, really happening. So we have been accompanying that movement. We have also had to change our business model because our clients are different. They are sitting in different places across the continent. So we've opened a large number of offices. We have now 35 offices across the continent, and very soon, in July 1st, we'll have 39. So we have a presence on the ground. We've increased the volume of our investments. We used to do about $3 billion every year.
Sure.
We passed the $10 billion bar last year, and we were at 11, and I think we're going to be higher this year. Our managing director is pushing us to go even higher than that, so I'm sure we will get there. But what is interesting is that these investments this year will be in 41 countries. So we're really trying to spread, because with technology, that's what I really find it's very interesting. You can see that growth, that opportunity, that solutions can come from everywhere in the continent.
Okay.
From where sometimes we don't expect it. And so that's very important to be able to support all of that.
Okay, so just if we pick up then on the theme that has been raised, and I like it, it's really nice. You make reference to what Asia has done. I imagine you were talking specifically about China, Ike, in terms of creating its own table, repeated by yourself, Ralph. And okay, so if we move with this analogy that the continent can build its own table, we don't necessarily have to sit at what's already there. I'm coming back to you, Sergio, in terms of asking what the short-term implications of this could be on financing. Already we have heard that we have a lot of opportunity, and a lot of that opportunity will take a lot of money to realize. Short-term, medium-term implications, if any, of us creating our own table. I think it was just yesterday where the Biden administration administered further sanctions on China. They have their reasons, of course, but what I'm trying to say is that when we do go the Asian way against a status quo, there are ramifications. For financing, in your view, will there be any significant implications of money that will be coming into the continent as a result of that? Perhaps another way to put it, will it increase or lower the risk premium?
Well, you know, I think the world is changing globally. Whether we decide in Africa to do that course or to do another course, the world will still continue changing. So what I see in Africa is that if we are going and developing our own financial instruments, if we are going and tap into the capital markets, help them develop, make them deeper, and we take a route that is more African focused, I think we'll just be adding value. We'll just be adding a route that contains a lot of promise. So this will also create more certainty. You are talking about sort of the level of risk premium and so on. I think this will actually create a direction that will alleviate the problem rather than anything else. So I'm not worried about the short term on this type of direction. I think on the long term, the impact will be very positive, and on the short term, I think we can really manage it.
Sure. I do appreciate the longer term vision, because ultimately it's what the proverbial promised land that we're trying to aspire to. But I also would like to appreciate maybe some of the short-term pain that might be involved in getting there. And we heard from Mr. Diop earlier around, or the call for domestic lenders to step in a lot more than is presently the case. We heard the IFC is looking to do a lot more, but we need a lot more domestic capital. With that said, we have seen a de-risking from the continent, particularly since the financial crisis of 2008, where many of the big banks have pulled out. And I would have liked to know whether you reckon this is an opportunity for local lenders, or does it present a greater challenge for you to step in and fund more?
I think President Kagame laid very excellent and strong foundations for this part of our discussion. First of all, you do know that when you say the big banks are pulling out, you're referring to the international banks, because in Africa, we also have big banks.
Oh, right. Okay, got you, sir. My bad. My bad.
And so some African big banks are buying as the international banks are exiting. For instance, Access Bank is doing so. But the key thing to note, and I harp on the Asian experience, the Asian tigers, China, India subsequently, learned around about the 80s and 90s the importance of having very strong domestic financial systems, okay? And what they did was they mobilized from within their own economies huge savings into Asian financial institutions. So Asian pension funds, Asian banks, and so on, okay? And this money was in turn used to finance development within their countries, okay? In our case, we have situations where huge financial resources are saved by Africans in foreign financial institutions, in foreign markets. And the irony is that when we want to borrow, we seek, investments and credit from the international markets funded by these international banks, okay? And then they charge you a premium on your own money. It's incongruous, right? So again, it comes to the issue of what's the table. And when I said that President Kagame laid a great foundation, it requires the private and public sector to come together and say, let us create a powerful African common financial system. We're not saying others cannot play. We're saying this table must be ours. Because if we don't control the table, we're going to have to eat whatever is served to us, if you get my point. And if I think further, along that line, I mean, look, if you, as an African borrower, is going to the Eurobond market, okay, you've got to, learn how to, basically be dictated to by the European, if you like, financial system. If you create your Afro bond market, okay, then the financing conditions and so on could probably more reflect our own needs and our own, priorities. Now, I'm not in any way saying that the fundamental principles of finance will not come to play in our markets just like you have in every other market. And I'm not saying that our standards and our principles would be necessarily any different. But the truth of the fact is that nuances, perceptions count a lot.
They do. And so it's a lovely audience that's full of claps. I absolutely love it. They do. And that's why we also have seen important institutions on the continent trying to ensure that the perceptions of the continent are more accurate. I mean, I do know that the African Union is moving closer and closer to the establishment of its own ratings agency, and the idea of perhaps even a single currency on the continent, something very far away, but something that is in the pipeline. In the interim, though, Mr. Ta, we have heard about the importance of small businesses also on the continent. And I know that there's a lot of entrepreneurs who are in this room, and businesses who might be small, who might be at medium scale right now, but who can certainly need or who can certainly do with funding to even grow further and make a bigger impact than they presently are right now. Perhaps a more direct message to them, sir, in terms of how DFI's finance, but more importantly, how to make their projects a lot more bankable. We often hear not a lot of bankable projects in the pipeline, not a lot of bankable projects in the pipeline, fine. How do they make them more appealing to institutions such as yours?
So in fact, if we look at the landscape of the financial system in Africa, we realize that over the past few years, we realized a big transformation in the landscape with bank opening branches in various countries. So we have transcontinental banks, but also the African DFIs have played a pivotal role in developing new solutions. And for instance, if we look at the Pan-African payment system, which has been developed by Afrexim Bank, it is creating a lot of opportunities for trade among African countries. And also some facilities like the facility developed by AFC to help those who have projects to develop their project and to make them bankable. So the African DFIs are playing a pivotal role, and they are working together. And I am happy that recently during the AU summit, the Alliance of African Multilateral Financial Institutions has been launched. And this alliance is going to play a pivotal role in helping the business community in Africa to develop their project and to take advantage and to reap the benefit of what the continent has in terms of power potential, in terms of agriculture, food production, in terms of value chain in the mineral sector and extractive industry in general, but more importantly, developing the talent of African youth.
Sure.
Because African youth is the future of the continent.
Sure. Fantastic. Ralph, to the point that you made about the new technologies and innovations that we're seeing around the world, the point that you made about, and that has been made by other speakers as well, we just need to make sure that we're not being left behind. You dropped a big figure about the amount of investments that will be required in digital infrastructure alone, $100. Do we have the conducive environment then for players such as yourselves and perhaps even international partners to invest in the African continent right now to ensure that we'll also be able to enjoy some of the spoils that are happening in the technological landscape?
I mean, the next 3 to 5 years are going to be transformational in the technology space. We've spoken about Gen AI, supercomputing is there, cloud-based services. There is the space economy. Let's not forget that.
Sure.
Let's not forget that the space economy is going to play a big role. Low Earth orbit satellites are being launched constantly now, and they're going to be huge constellations in the next 3 to 5 years. And that's also going to be fairly transformative. What we do need to think about is to think through what do we as Africans want to get out of the technology and the evolution and the shifts that are coming through. And in that thought process, really thinking about regulatory developments, how do we create a regulatory systems that are common across Africa? Because whilst we have the same population as India, India is one country. So you have one set of regulations. Right now, we have regulations that differ from each country. But the capital that needs to come is long-term capital. And we would love to be able to say we're investing, whether it's Africa domestic capital or international capital, they'd love to be able to say we are putting $10 billion across the African continent. We understand the regulatory context, and we can anticipate our own return profile. So I would argue that the thing that we do need to think about is harmonizing regulatory developments, particularly in the technology space, because right now it is very much country by country. So you do need to study 54 odd regulatory regimes. And if we can have, in line with Vision 2063, the One Africa, and think about, because technology is borderless. So why don't we think about a borderless regulatory framework? And I think the capital will come in. The 100 billion would be easily financeable by domestic and international capital.
Okay, so I purposely left your intervention, ma'am, as the last. And just picking up on the points that two points that Ralph made, words that I want to take from his intervention. I want to highlight common, and I want to highlight harmony. Because in the words of your president, ma'am, we heard earlier on that the urgency for business as usual, or to change business as usual, it's not new. But we do need to urgently work together more and collaborate more, commonly, in harmony, and all that jazz, ma'am. That's also not new, but I'd just like to understand what progress you are seeing then on the continent that can speak to the understanding that more urgent collaboration and partnerships, one voice needs to take place. Is anything happening, ma'am, and what frameworks can be put in place to ensure that it can happen at a greater speed?
That's a good question. I'm trying to see a downside to it. Is there any downside to coming together? I don't see. If anything, that we are also a testament of as a continent is the downside of being fragmented or not operating together.
Sure.
So literally, your question is a bit the answer. There's no downside to it. We can speak to many success stories. However slow the implementation of our free trade area is happening. And I guess the rest of the world is watching. The onus is on us to not be distracted, to remain focused on what we need to do. And to speak to bold, and I think it's Tawfiq who said that bold is the new safe. It truly is. The changes we have to make on this continent will have to be massive and at scale. We did not touch to the crisis or the theme of climate change and the pledges that are coming around, the funds that are being put together. We will not achieve the results we want if we don't really mobilize at scale, which means coming together. So I don't think there's a way out of it. There should be a highway to it, a faster way to it. Regulatory framework, certainly, we are removing many trade barriers, and the integration of banks, because we spoke of banking, speaks to the fact that we are also having unified systems and all of that. And there are interesting trends. I want to look at the future rather than the past. Look at the trend of Western banks leaving our continent.
Sure.
Great opportunities for the likes of Access Bank and others, and certainly great opportunities to deepen the penetration of our own public and private investments. So coming together will not be an option. It's how fast, how well, and there's, I think, a point that has been made without maybe touching on the how. The policies, the regulations, the people who rate our bonds and our markets, those exist.
Sure.
We spoke to the fact that we have to set our own table, but in fact, what matters is not that we have a table of our own. What matters is that we understand that the reference point should not be the other tables. And I think the fact that we are here, and the Africa CEO Forum is growing with the partnership of the likes of AFC, with hosting. First, it was an alternating movement. I think they will keep it. I don't know, between Geneva and African capital, speaks to the fact that this place cannot be not taken into account.
All right.
We spoke also about the transition and the critical minerals for the transition. Look, 40% of them are on this continent. And instead of looking at the loss and damage fund, how about thinking that the transition will not happen without us, and it will not be sustainable without us? And we are already living the consequences of climate change. So I feel the change of mindset, as President Kagame really emphasized upon, is the one most important thing to understand. The moment we understand what really lies in our hands, the future of the planet, our own future included, we discuss differently. We address the rest of the world differently, and solutions and creativity, we're not short of it. So I'm rather hopeful, but it won't be enough repeated, enough emphasized upon that the major change to be made is the change in mindset.
All right. I'm going to leave it there.
On the mindset issue, it's very important that we don't lose this opportunity.
Okay.
We've mentioned leadership. We've mentioned mindsets. We've mentioned that we're in the fourth industrial revolution, and this is a time for leapfrogging and great change. I think that the private sector and the public sector, CEOs, government, NGOs, have to work together much better. And indeed, we've been brainstorming around an issue that's in Access Bank and my foundation, the Agimakwere Foundation. And we've determined to do something, and it's an invitation for us all to work together on this. And this is to create, call it a super NGO, that will fund government initiatives that have a game-changing impact on African economies, okay? Access Bank has committed $200 million as startup funding for it. My NGO, the Agimakwere Foundation, $100 million, that's $300 million. We should push for $1 billion. MTN, I'm sure, will come in. But the whole idea is this. If in India, you have the India stack, and in 10 years, 1.3 billion Indians have digital IDs and have the capacity to do all kinds of things, we can do, and that costs $1 billion, by the way, okay?
Sure.
There is so much that can be achieved in Africa if we come together and work in that regard. So it's an invitation. I'm open to talk to anybody who wants to join us in this journey. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful invitation, sir. Thank you. Of course, I do know that a lot has not been said, but I think that we should just think about this conversation as the entree. Quite a lot on the menu, as you did hear a little bit earlier from Amir. Think of it as perhaps a 10-course, 11-course experience that you're going to have, because there's still a lot that will be discussed in the next 2 days regarding how to strengthen, ultimately, how to better strengthen Africa's standing right now and help it to better realize its true self. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask you to kindly help me thank the panelists for their fantastic insights. As I said, a lot more still on the menu for the next 2 days, including, how Africa can become a better champion in artificial intelligence. We'll also be having a Prime Minister's panel that does speak to creating a better business class, first-in-class business environment, as well as hearing from leaders of captains of industry, more captains of industry tomorrow, and then we will close for the defining presidential panel that will define Africa's role in the global stage. To all of you, thank you so much for giving of your time for this morning. Thank you so much to the heads of state for staying. So thank you so much. And We do appreciate the time that you have given us, and we do look forward to hearing further outcomes of the deliberations that I'm sure you will be having. We're going to take a tea break right now. When we return, we'll be meeting in the Kigali Convention Center. All of the action will be taking place there. If you do want to keep up to date with the program as it happens live, do make sure to download the app of the Africa CEO Forum, ACF for 2024. I think you should be able to find it on any of your downloading platforms. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you and see you soon. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry for the short time.